Well, hello there. I hope you had a nice summer because after Labor Day, it's officially over. I had a great summer and a most excellent Labor Day weekend. We just got back from our RV trip last night, unloaded, got the kid in his first day of first grade this morning, returned the RV, and I am ready to get cracking. And I open up my RegAlytics, and by golly, the team did it again. We just knocked over the 3 million mark of regulatory alerts. And so that's huge. Congratulations to the entire RegAlytics team. You are all amazing. And I know I had a really good rest because I'm finding financial services alerts interesting. But it's tough, right? Because if you're not in the industry, I have to give you a little background so that you understand why these things are interesting. But in terms of the most interesting alerts from this week's 29,092 regulatory alerts, the regulator of the week is the CFTC, specifically Carolyn Pham. I've mentioned her before. I have never seen a regulator speak more negatively about an organization of which she is a leader. And I have to say, I'm starting to respect it. I'm a big believer of change from within, and when you take a look at what was happening at the FDIC, where the leadership was allowed this toxic work environment to go on for decades, with people feeling afraid to speak up to the point that outsiders had to intervene, I have to say it's got to be somewhat healthy that a commissioner of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission can complain about the policies she's outvoted on. So I wasn't sure where she was coming from, so I did a little more homework, not much admittedly, but based on what she says, she's consistently complaining that the CFTC is overreaching, meaning it's passing rules and issuing enforcement actions that are beyond its own power. And she's gotten louder and louder, and voila, we now have a Supreme Court case that is saying that the SEC's enforcement is violating the due process rules in the United States because it's not in front of a jury. We also have the Supreme Court overruling Chevron deference, saying that this idea that an agency can do anything it wants unless it's arbitrary and capricious is just way too low a standard. Now, typically, I would expect a right-leaning person who would be complaining of government overreach, but in this case, she was appointed by the Biden administration. She's the first Vietnamese American woman to be nominated for the role. She's worked in major law firms, including Sullivan and Cromwell. She's been at Citibank. She's worked for the SEC and the OCC, and even in her early career at the CFTC. And so putting all of these facts together makes it all the more convincing that perhaps she is speaking truth to power and she's calling out the status quo. So this week, the CFTC fined NASDAQ futures $22 million for failing to properly disclose details of its incentive programs and making false statements to the CFTC. From 2015 to 2018, NASDAQ futures did not disclose a volume-based incentive component of this designated market maker program, which violated several core principles of the Commodity Exchange Act. And the CFTC emphasized the importance of accurate information from the CFTC designated exchanges, okay? There you go. And she dissented. She said that it was bogus, especially since NASDAQ deregistered in 2020. 4 years ago, it deregistered. She also said volume-based incentives were common in exchanges, and it's just that the CFTC doesn't really understand the market very well. She also said that NASDAQ was answering questions at the time honestly, to the best of their knowledge, in good faith, and without intent to defraud. Who's right? I don't know. But I do think there's someone on the industry's side inside the CFTC. The topic of the week is end port amendments. I know, sounds really exciting. But basically, let's go back to Robinhood. No, let's go back to the 2008 financial crisis, okay? So there are financial institutions that have to report certain things to the regulators, and sometimes those things are kept private, and sometimes those things are made public, okay? So when we had the big crash in 2008 and the world discovered how interconnected all of the banks through these large swap positions were, there was this big push to create more transparency for the too big to fail organizations so the regulators could, see what was going on. So all that happened. Meanwhile, there were some large asset managers that decided to shrink on purpose, so they would not have to follow the onerous reporting rules. And money started getting closely held and more private. So then the financial regulators started building out different forms that these more private investment types had to register, like a Form PF for hedge funds. There's also Form NCEN and NPORT, which will require more frequent reporting for registered investment companies, including open-end funds and closed-end funds. So now it's going to be monthly reporting instead of quarterly, and the detail will be available to the public 60 days later. Not everybody loves this. In fact, I'm pretty sure every compliance officer, tech person, and business person is exhausted to have yet another report change and increase in its frequency. But the newly passed rules also includes guidance on liquidity risk. This is because regulators are increasingly worried that these investment managers need to be more careful safeguarding their investors' money. And it makes sense because these are, for example, mutual funds, and normal, ordinary humans, not just the wealthy, invest in these. And you would obviously not want to gamble and lose your savings because the mutual fund didn't wisely monitor liquidity risk. Some folks, like Mark Uyeda at the SEC, think it's worrisome because each one of these investment managers compete, and they have their special secret sauce that makes their investment better than the other fund or whatever. And there's worry with all this public reporting that it's going to ruin competition, and people will be able to reverse engineer certain financial strategies, and people could lose their edge. Again, no comment here on the merits, but now you know why NPORT revisions and the CFTC are interesting. And that's it this week for RegAlytics. We have the global supply chain of the world's regulatory alerts in one very easy to use place. And if you need a solution related to anything with regulation, give us a call.